Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Leaving the military or federal service is a full life transition, not just a career change. From health coverage and education benefits to financial planning and family support, knowing what's available can help you shape your future. Here with ideas to get you started is the president of Armed Forces Mutual, Mike Meese. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here, Terry.
You know, summer is sort of a season of transition, not just for military members, but this year for a lot of federal employees who might be facing downsizing or retirement or career shifts. Let's walk through some of the things that people should be thinking about as they prepare for these changes. Maybe start with life insurance. What should folks be thinking about if they're getting out of the military or if they're getting out of federal government?
Well, it's very important that they think about that in terms of protecting their family. While you're in federal government service, in most cases, you're covered by the federal employees' government life insurance. If you're in the military, it's service members group life insurance, but you lose that when you leave either federal service or government service. And if you're in federal service, you've got 31 days to apply, usually with another carrier to be able to do that. You don't get the government subsidy, so it's more expensive. Similar for service members, you can get VGLI. In both of those cases, whenever you do one of those transitions, it's important to shop around, look at other potential providers. In our case, Armed Forces Mutual provides life insurance for the military and veterans, is a great place to start to be sure that you're getting the adequate protection for your family at the right price.
Are there some key considerations that people should be thinking about as they think about adequate protection?
Yes, you want to try to do an assessment of what your family would be dependent upon to be able to take care of all of the normal daily needs, as well as if you've got young children at home, putting them through college, all of the kinds of things that you had hoped to earn through your career. If your career is unexpectedly stopped because you die, you don't want your family to either be destitute on the day-to-day things or not be able to fulfill all the expectations. So for most people, we end up finding $500, $800, even $1 million worth of coverage is important.
Well, and you don't want to be trying to make those decisions while you're in the middle of transition, right? Thinking early and shopping around early is the best approach here.
Exactly. That's very important. And if you're in the military and trying to get a VA disability rating, you want to get that life insurance before all your retirement physicals, because that may identify something that you did not know was necessarily wrong with you. You, of course, would disclose that on a life insurance application. But if you don't know that you have that kind of illness, then you don't put that on the application.
Well, that's an important caution. And it brings up another question around medical care. Folks who are in the government have access to subsidized health insurance. Folks in the military have full health insurance. What should people be thinking about as they're preparing to step away from that full coverage?
The same kinds of things. What kind of coverage are you going to have? If you're retiring, then you can go into TRICARE for retirees if you're in the military, or the federal benefit program for retirees. If you're not retiring, it's important for you to determine, where am I going to get my source of health care? Is that from a spouse's employment? Because sometimes your spouse will have health care coverage for the family. Or are you going to take a look at continuing the current coverage that you have from your employer through paying it yourself, or going on to one of the healthcare exchanges? It's a very complicated process. So you want to start that early as you begin your transition.
And it's important to remember that dental and vision aren't always included in those programs, right?
No, exactly. And they are usually not subsidized. So, for example, there used to be a TRICARE retiree dental program that was taken away about 10 or 12 years ago. Now they take all the federal military retirees and throw us in with all the federal workers in the federal employees dental and vision insurance program. It's not substantial. It's organized by the federal government, but not substantially subsidized by the federal government. So you want to look very carefully at exactly what your needs are.
I'm speaking with Mike Meese. He serves as the president of Armed Forces Mutual. Well, Mike, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about education and training, because the job market is such now that it could be really difficult without some retraining or additional education to find a new fit. What sort of benefits should people be looking into there?
Well, again, for veterans, you're eligible for the Veterans Readiness and Employment. It used to be called Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment, but it's Chapter 31 benefits up to 48 months of training, which you can get even if you have left service, maybe went to the federal government and then have left, as long as it's within 12 years of your date of discharge from the military. If you have a disability that affects your ability to work, the Veterans Readiness and Employment is something that you may want to consider. You'd want to consider that first before looking at the other benefits, such as the post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, because if you use the Veterans Readiness and Employment first, then the post 9/11 GI Bill benefits may still be eligible for your children.
And can you talk a little bit about the transferability of the GI Bill?
Yeah, that's one of the most advantageous things that happened after 9/11 is they allowed you to, if you earn post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, that's up to 36 months of benefits. So basically 4 years of 9 months at school. You can transfer that to your children, eligible dependents, or to your spouse, and they can use those benefits. In my case, I had 2 daughters. I gave 18 months to each of them. And not only did they get tuition at, in their cases, University of Connecticut, George Mason University, but they were also able to get the basic allowance for housing for an E5 in the military, and that helped defray the food and dormitory costs when they were in college.
Sounds like a great opportunity. And you mentioned that it's transferable to family members, so spouses, it could apply to spouses as well?
It also can apply to spouses, and a few tips on that. Children have to use it before age 26. So you could even use it if they got a scholarship for college and they were under 26, they could use that for graduate school, for example. The other thing is you want to transfer at least 1 month to each child and maybe 1 month to your spouse. That way, in my case, my two daughters, just the way semesters broke, ended up with 4.5 months left over. And they're over 26. They're not going to be able to use it. The only one left, I may have to go back and take an art class or something to be able to take advantage of all of those post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. Had I transferred it to my spouse, she would have been able to use that.
Well, one more topic then that people can be thinking about as they're preparing for transition is financial readiness. We've talked in the past about financial literacy, but what about financial readiness? How do people evaluate where they are and what should they be thinking about?
Well, the important thing is you need to be situationally aware and know what your income is, what your expenses are, and what your net worth is. As we take a look at it, budgeting is critically important. And when we are working with people that are transitioning out of the military or out of a federal civilian service, they don't know what their income is going to be. But frequently what they should know is, how much do I need to live off of? In other words, what are my expenses? You'd be surprised how many people just don't know where all the money goes and what is discretionary, what is absolutely essential. And once we identify, hey, I need this amount of money to live on each month, we recommend, especially as you're going through a transition, that you have at least 6 to 8 months of those expenses, especially the ones that you absolutely need to pay, like a mortgage, like food, like car insurance, that you want to be able to have 8 months of expenses so that you don't either go into debt or have to immediately take that first job that's available just to be able to make ends meet.
And what are some of the surprising things that people come across as they begin to build that budget?
It's amazing how much the transportation costs are, because if you were in federal government service or if you lived on post, you probably didn't drive very far. Even things like gym memberships. Those people that are in the military, you not only don't have to pay for gym memberships, but usually your first sergeant is your personal trainer that gets you up at 6 a.m. to be able to do PT every day. When you have those kinds of expenses, uniform expenses, clothing expenses, all of those kinds of things tend to add up quite quickly, in addition to, as we mentioned, medical and dental insurance and those kinds of things. So that's why definitely be prepared before you enter one of these transitions.
Well, speaking of that, as people start to think about transitioning, whether it's from military service or federal service, what's the first step you recommend that they take?
Well, the first thing that you should do is getting as much information that you can. Our website, Armed Forces Mutual.com, has a great transition checklist that people can download. MilitaryOneSource.com, for those that are in the military, has great resources. And then there's other civilian organizations out there. Hire Our Heroes or American Corporate Partners also have tools. So you can, before you make this leap, learn as much as you can, look at the helpful checklists, and then use that to start networking with others to be able to facilitate the next great job that you have.
I'm speaking with Mike Meese. He's the president of Armed Forces Mutual. Mike, thanks for the great advice.
Great, Terry. Good to talk to you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former senior advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites in airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again, and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization. Really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third-generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down, and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one coming from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it. Share the credit. Perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him and as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has Pearls of Wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.